I see the two debaters in the background. Let me bring both of them in. Gentlemen, how are you doing today? You doing all right?
Good, thank you. Good morning.
Good.
Is my am I on?
Yeah, you're on. I can hear you.
Hold a second.
You okay? You good? Daniel, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. How you doing, Daniel? You doing all right?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. We're all set. Everything's functioning okay.
Yes, we're all set. Okay, let me introduce both of you. So we have Dimitri Lascaris.
But I can't hear you tomorrow.
Oh, you can't hear me.
Uh,
Why can't you hear me? Dimitri, can you
what's
hear me?
going on here?
Yes.
Should
Okay,
I
so Dimitri
reload
can
or
hear.
what?
No, I can hear you, but you can't hear me.
Hold on. Give me a
Hold on.
second. I'm sorry, guys.
Okay. Daniel is going to get his mic straight, but while he gets it straight, Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Dimitri runs the show Reason to Resist. Definitely check him out on YouTube. He has a fantastic channel, and he has been a damn good friend of the show. And I've immensely appreciated him, this contribution. Daniel Lazare, he's an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. And you can check his content out on DH Lazare on Twitter. He also has a column on permanentrevolution.org and daniellazare.substack.com. Daniel will be back. Oh, there we are. Daniel, can you hear me now?
I hear you fine. Sorry about that.
Excellent. No, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine.
Good.
Welcome to the show, guys. I am glad both of you can join me. There was a bit of a kerfuffle between you two. Daniel went after a perspective that Dimitri had. A debate eventually came up as something that both of these guys wanted to hash out. So let's do it that way. And we have two questions on this debate. The first question, well, I just get both questions. One is the future of Gaza, and the other one has to do with whether or not this is a genocide. And I guess there's a bit of leeway in that conversation. So let's start with that. And Dimitri, I'm going to let you start with this because this was specifically your question. Each of you got to do a question. Give me your take on this. Is this a genocide? And if so, how do you come to that conclusion? Meaning, how do you define genocide in a way where you can define what is taking place? Meaning hundreds of thousands of people dead, buried under the rubble, not to mention the people who they were able to record, starvation, etc. Give me your take on this, Dimitri. Let's start with you.
Well, this is quintessentially a legal question. Let me, first of all, thank you for organizing this, Jamal, and for approaching this whole subject with the frame of mind that the best way to resolve these vitally important questions is through vigorous and open debate. And I also thank Daniel for joining us to have this conversation. So this is a legal question. This is often framed by defenders of Israel as a political one. It's not political. It's certainly not how I approach the question. I approach it as a lawyer, which is what I am. I've practiced for over 30 years. That doesn't mean my judgment is infallible. Hey, man, it's entirely possible some layperson who's really informed about the law might be able to educate me about this. But I think it is relevant that it's a legal question, and I'm a lawyer. And as a matter of fact, on behalf of two Palestinian Canadians, I'm currently prosecuting a claim against the Canadian government for violating the Genocide Convention by not preventing and punishing genocide in Gaza. I should also mention that the human rights experts, and again, this is not definitive. I came here to have a debate and not foreclose it by invoking these experts, but the experts who have opined that Israel is committing genocide include Amnesty International, which is based in the UK, Human Rights Watch based in the United States, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the wonderful Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, another Israeli human rights group, Physician for Human Rights Israel, and most recently, the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories. And this is not an exhaustive list. I also want to mention that I was in Palestine during the genocide. I went to the West Bank. I spent quite a bit of time there in the Jenin and Tulkarm refugee camps. I went to the border of Gaza, spent hours there observing what I could because I couldn't get in. And I've spoken to dozens of Palestinians who either live in the occupied territories or have family members there. So my legal opinion is based upon all of this evidence and more. So the starting point is Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, to which Israel is a party. And it says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And the jurisprudence, there is extensive jurisprudence of international tribunals, including the ICJ, interpreting this. When they say in whole or in part in the Genocide Convention, it doesn't have to be a majority. It has to be a material part of the population. So what are the acts they have to commit to be guilty of genocide? Any one of the following categories of acts suffices, but in Israel's case, at least 4 out of 5 apply. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. There's another one about transferring children, but I'm going to leave that aside because I think it's a slam dunk that Israel has committed the first 4. And as I say, you only need to commit 1. Now, since October 7th, Israeli forces have killed 543 aid workers in Gaza. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Israel has killed 241 journalists in Gaza, injured 162 and imprisoned 92, and it won't let the international media in to see the results of its handiwork. Earlier this month, the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said Israel has killed over 1,500 healthcare workers. It has also imprisoned dozens of them in conditions amounting to torture. The vast majority of Gaza's hospitals have been damaged or destroyed. Numerous doctors from outside of Palestine who have served in Gaza have recounted how they found medical equipment that was completely non-threatening, but in fact was life-saving, that had been destroyed intentionally by Israeli forces who entered the hospital by, for example, shooting the medical equipment full of holes. So we could go on and on about the acts, but I don't think, I would be very surprised if Daniel wants to deny that Israel has committed those acts. I suspect that where the debate will happen, and this is generally what happens when you talk about this allegation of genocide against Israel, is around the question of intent. And that's the last thing I want to mention here. The wonderful Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq has created a database of statements of genocidal intent by Israeli leaders. And there are other organizations that have done this as well. It's not just Al-Haq. So I'm just going to give you a tiny sample. Yoav Gallant, defense minister at the time he made this statement, October 9, 2023, we are imposing a complete siege on Gaza, no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security on November 11, 2023, quote, to be clear, when they say that Hamas needs to be eliminated, it also means those who sign, those who support, and those who distribute candy. All of these are terrorists and must be eliminated. Amichai Eliyahu, Heritage Minister, November 1st, 2023, the north of the Strip, more beautiful than ever, blowing up and flattening everything, simply a delight for the eyes. Nassim Vaturi, Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, October 7, 2023. Now we all have one common goal, erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Those who are unable will be replaced. Giora Eland, Reservist Major General, former head of Israeli National Security and advisor to the defense minister in October and November 2023. And here are just a couple of his doozies. Quote, water comes from wells with salt water unfit for consumption. They have water treatment plants. Israel should hit those plants. When the entire world says we have gone insane and this is a humanitarian disaster, we will say it's a means, close quote. And finally, he said this, quote, who are the poor women of Gaza? They are all the mothers, sisters, or wives of Hamas murderers. On the one hand, they are part of the infrastructure that supports the organization. And on the other hand, if they experience a humanitarian disaster, then it can be assumed that some of the Hamas fighters and the more junior commanders will begin to understand that the war is futile. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this. As difficult as that may be, after all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer. I could go on and on. This is a tiny sample. If you want, we can talk about this for hours. But in my opinion, it is beyond reasonable doubt that Israel is committing genocide. It has the requisite intent. I think it's not even hiding that fact at this stage. And I find it mind-boggling that anybody purporting to be a journalist would deny this at this stage.
Daniel, I mean, do you disagree with that premise? I mean, I read the article you sent.
Yeah.
And it seemed like you were making the argument more so that genocide it's a buzzword, but it's difficult to define, or the definition is hazy.
Yeah. First of all, I don't disagree with any of the facts that Dimitri has recited. I think the situation in Gaza is horrible. Israel has waged an aggressive, overwhelming war that has caused vast human suffering. And I think that Zionism itself is an ideology of Jewish supremacy, which is essentially racist to all non-Jews who come under Israeli jurisdiction or domination. And as such, it makes, it's simply a fly in the ointment. It simply is a disruptive influence that impedes any kind of progress towards democracy in the Middle East. And I think it's an extremely negative force. So I quite agree with him there. But I don't want to quarrel over the question of intent, because my point is a little bit different with regard to genocide. And by the way, I appreciate that Dimitri is a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've written 3 books about the law, about the US Constitution. And I know that you can't merely apply the law. You've got to assess the law. And the UN Genocide Convention, in my assessment, is simply incoherent. The phrase intent to destroy in whole or in part simply does not make any sense. And by the way, the history of genocide is fascinating. The term was invented by a right-wing Zionist, of all people, named Raphael Lemkin, who essentially mounted he lost 50 members of his extended family to the Nazis. He was a Polish Jew who escaped by the skin of his teeth to Scandinavia and eventually made his way to the US, where he mounted a one-man campaign to get genocide made the law of the world, and succeeded quite handsomely. But the idea is incoherent. Intent to destroy in whole or part.
Wait, real quick. Why is that inherent? Why is that incoherent?
Because intent to destroy doesn't mean that the intent matters or the destruction matters. If your intent is to destroy the Palestinians, the Jews, et cetera, is the intent what counts, even if you don't kill a single person? If it's destroy, does destroy mean physically, economically, et cetera, et cetera? Is there a threshold? Hitler only succeeded in killing 35% of world Jewry. He did kill about 80% of European Jewry. But what is the threshold? And in fact, Samantha Power, in her book, A Problem from Hell, which essentially put genocide on the map and enabled the neocons to use genocide to involve, to justify all kinds of military interventions in the Middle East, in the Balkans as well. Samantha Power admitted that the lack of a threshold meant that there was great leeway in terms of the military powers on when to intervene or not. In other words, the US could intervene in a country where a genocide was going on, even though the violence was relatively small scale. If the US perceived there was intent to commit genocide, then it could send troops in. It was an all-purpose motivation for military intervention. And essentially, the incoherence means that almost anything can be labeled a genocide. For example, Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, 2023, killed 1,200 people, most of them civilians, merely because they were Israeli. Ghazi Hamad, a Hamas spokesman, 2 weeks later vowed that they would do 2, 3, 4, as many October 7th as they could. Now, according to the UN definition, this is genocide. The vow to keep on killing Israelis, if you accept that UN genocide fits the definition perfectly. So what do we have here? We have 2 genocides going on. And how does that help us understand the situation? I mean, who isn't guilty of genocide? Was the Soviet Red Army guilty of genocide when they poured 2 million rounds of artillery into central Berlin, starting on April 22nd, 1945? Was the U.S. and Britain guilty of genocide when they carried out fire bombings of Hamburg and Dresden? On and on and on and on. The term is essentially meaningless. And a movement which essentially bases itself on a single incoherent word is a movement that is going nowhere. And in fact, it has gone nowhere. Israel has carried on with complete disregard to international opinion. The anti-Zionist movement has not impeded the Israeli military effort one bit, and the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza has gone from bad to nightmarish. So this movement has failed because it's based on a very simplistic idea, which may impress fellow lawyers, but does not impress the world of politics. That's it.
Okay. I'm not in this debate. I'm going to give this to Dimitri.
Okay.
Dimitri, go ahead.
Well, this is a new one. I haven't heard this argument before, but I'll give you my immediate reaction. Daniel said, as I understand his position, that the concept of genocide is incoherent because there's no threshold. That's just not true. There is a threshold, and I said it at the outset. The threshold is a material part of the population, the group that's being targeted. Now, you can say, well, material is ambiguous. Sure it is. That leaves the court a significant degree of judgment. But this concept, Daniel, is, it's literally all over the law. So I'll just give you an example. I in much of my career, I started on Wall Street. I was a securities lawyer. And the fundamental concept that we had to deal with as securities lawyers when talking about whether information, a misrepresentation was actionable, was the question of materiality. And we had to get into a discussion about whether this particular type of information would have a material impact on the stock price. And courts all over the United States, all the way up to the US Supreme Court for decades, have been applying the concept of materiality. And so have courts throughout the West. And they've been doing this in a variety of contexts outside of securities law and genocide. So this is a threshold. It is eminently capable of being interpreted by wise courts with a certain degree of flexibility. And I think that that's what the drafters of the Genocide Convention wanted. They wanted to give the court some flexibility in applying the definition instead of saying you have to wipe out 3.5% of the population or something like that. So it's just not true that there's no threshold, and the threshold that's in there.
But Dimitri, that's why they liked it.
Daniel, there's a number of other points you made, and I'm happy to let you respond. But I do want to just quickly respond to your other points. You said, you went on about Hamas, committing genocide. I thought we came here to debate whether Israel's committing genocide, my friend. So I'm not going to get sucked into that debate. But for the record, I think your analysis of Hamas's conduct, to the extent you're suggesting it meets the definition of genocide, I think is preposterous. But I'm not here to have that debate. You said that the movement is based on a single word. What movement are you talking about here? What movement are you talking about here? There has been a Palestinian solidarity movement that has existed for decades, and it has invoked a number of legal principles that Israel has savagely violated again and again. For example, our movement was saying for years prior to October 7, 2023, that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian people. As Noam Chomsky noted, its form of apartheid is much worse than the one that was inflicted upon the Black population of South Africa. I could give you a list of organizations that said as much. Are you going to say that apartheid is incoherent now for some reason? We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of collective punishment. We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of arbitrary arrest and detention and extrajudicial assassinations. We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of torture, and including, as B'Tselem found, the torture of Palestinian children in detention. What word are you talking about? Israel has violated the entire range of human rights obligations and principles of human decency, and we've been invoking all of them all these years. And the reason why the movement has not yet succeeded in achieving liberation for the Palestinian people is because your government, the government of the United States, does not give a damn about any of these things. That's the problem.
First of all, Dimitri, it's not my government. I am opposed to this government. I am a Marxist. I'm completely opposed to the U.S. government in every way, shape, or form. Number one. Number two, we are here to discuss genocide, if I'm not correct. And you recited a list of examples of exterminationist rhetoric by various Israeli politicians. And of course, you know, I don't challenge your facts at all. But in July 2020, the head of the Hamas women's movement told a rally in Gaza, quote, "This is our fate, my beloved sisters, to be Allah's hand on earth, the hand that will finish off the Israelites, this Zionist enemy, Allah willing. Allah brought them here in droves so that Palestine becomes their graveyard, Allah willing." 3 years later, a Hamas religious official named Hamad al-Rageb declared in a Friday sermon, "O Allah, bring annihilation upon the Jews, paralyze them, destroy their entity, tear them apart, and bring upon them a terrible punishment. O Allah, enable us to get to the necks of the Jews." In June 2023, wait, let me finish. That's 4 months prior to October 7th.
Please, I'm sorry. Please.
An Islamic scholar named Hussein Qassem declared on Hamas's official TV station, quote, "The Jews are not the enemies of the Palestinians alone. They are the enemies of humanity as a whole, and the enemies of every monotheist in the world. Why shouldn't we be furious? Why shouldn't we burn the ground under the Jews' feet?" Now, this is all I'm saying is that the word genocide is so elastic that it applies equally to both sides. So if you have two genocidal parties in conflict with one another, how does the word genocide illuminate the problem? I mean, I think that the problem with Dimitri is that he is approaching this in an exclusively legalistic way, which is a very limited way of seeing this conflict. And I think, therefore, his conclusions are misleading and one-sided. He's not seeing the problem in its totality, and he's not seeing the inadequacy of this whole mode of analysis.
Daniel, let me ask a question on this one. If I always say there's no such thing as neutrality in regards to media and the way that they look at events. If I am standing around, let's say at the time where the United States was committing a genocide against the Native Americans, and I was like, I tried to both sides, then I'm being unfair to the fact that basically I'm protecting one side in this. Do you accept that for all intents and purposes, you mentioned yourself that Zionism is a supremacist ideology? And let's say we were talking about the Nazis, and the Nazis were exterminating the Jews, and the Jews responded to that by attacking the Nazis. Let's say they were creating bands of groups that were attacking Germans as a response. You don't think that there's a difference between people who are responding to being an apartheid state or being oppressed or occupied, as opposed to the people who are doing the occupying? Because it sounds like you're equating both as if both are on equal terms. One group is responding. The other group is committing the atrocities. They are committing the apartheid or the occupation. You don't see a difference in those things.
Well, I do see a difference, and I see a similarity at the same time. I mean, I think it's. I think, first of all, the Jews, the Gaza has been compared to the Warsaw Ghetto, and I've actually done a fair amount of research on the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto fighters not only didn't attack Polish civilians, they had no intention of doing that, and their ideology was directly opposite. They put out newspapers in the ghetto in which they called for all peoples of Europe to rise up against the Nazis. They were expressing solidarity with ordinary Poles and Russians and ordinary Germans as well. Now, if the Warsaw Ghetto fighters had broken out of the ghetto and massacred 1,200 innocent Polish civilians, then yeah, we would have had to see that uprising in a very, very different light. But they didn't do that. Now, yes, you have a right to resist oppression, but you don't have a right to resist oppression in a stupid manner that merely mirrors the oppression that is being visited upon you. And you can certainly, others certainly have a right to criticize the tactics that are used in fighting oppression. So the whole genocide question just seems to completely cloud this issue up. But if the Warsaw Ghetto fighters had committed an atrocity of that sort, then yeah, we would have to criticize them. We would have to say, what the hell went wrong here?
Really? Okay, Dimitri, give me your take on that. I mean,
I'm curious to know. I have a few things to say, and I invite Daniel to respond to this question when I'm done. Are you saying that it clouded the issue to say that what the Nazis did to the Jewish people was a genocide? Would you take the same position with respect to the monstrosities committed by Europeans, not Palestinians, against the Jewish people? I mean, because if you're being intellectual, why would you take a different position with respect to the Holocaust against the Jewish people?
I'm not.
Okay, well,
I don't.
So let me though return. I'm glad. Thank you for your candor. I find that rather surprising. I have no hesitation at all in saying that what was done to the Jewish people was a genocide. That was a slam dunk, just like this one from a legal perspective. Now, I just want to say something else. You continuously want to move the conversation over to Hamas. I'm not going to get into it other than to say I disagree with you for a whole bunch of reasons. But I will say this, even if you're right that the Hamas the leaders of Hamas have the requisite intent as it's defined under the Genocide Convention, no rational human being would think that Hamas has the ability to carry it out. Are you kidding me? Against a nuclear armed state that has 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs, Apache helicopters, F-35s, Merkava tanks, drones up the wazoo. They can mass murder people with complete impunity. And you think that there's a realistic threat that Hamas is going to actually be able to inflict upon the people of Israel a genocide? It's absolutely clear that they can't do it even if they wanted to. But Israel has ample ability to eviscerate, to annihilate the Palestinian people, as we've watched in horror. So that should be our primary concern right now. Let's deal with the practical reality, even if you're right, and I don't accept what you said. But the practical reality is there's one side here that can commit genocide and is doing so.
Well, then you are criticizing Hamas, because Hamas proclaimed its practical ability to mount successive October 7th. That's what God says.
Do you agree with them? Do you buy that they can do to Israel what Israel has done to Gaza? Come on, man.
But Dimitri, let me finish. I mean, Ghazi Hamad said, we have the capability. He said this.
But do you believe them? The question is, do you think everything Hamas leaders say is true? I doubt you do.
Under the UN Convention, it's intent. Ghazi Hamad announced his intent to carry out, Hamas's intent to carry out as many October 7th as was necessary. Okay, according Dimitri, let me finish.
Argument, Daniel. I'm willing to accept your characterization of his statements. You're not responding to my point. My point is, even if we accept your characterization of those statements, and by the way, I have criticized Hamas on a number of occasions. And if I too am a leftist, by the way, and I'm a secularist. On that basis alone, if I were a Palestinian, we can get into this in the second half, and I were living in the occupied territories, I would probably vote for somebody like, I don't know, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or maybe the PFLP, something like that. I wouldn't vote for any party that is explicitly oriented towards one religious belief.
You'd be killed, Dimitri.
No, I wouldn't.
Yes, you would be killed. You would be killed.
I was in Palestine last year after having vigorously, criticized Hamas. Ain't nobody laid a finger on me. But in any case, the point I'm making, and it's the one to which you have not responded, is irrespective of the intentions of Hamas leadership, they clearly do not have the capacity to commit a genocide, to wipe out the people, the Jewish population of Israel. They can't even come close to doing that. The number of people that these, and again, we won't get into it because it's a totally different subject. There's lots of evidence that they didn't kill 800 civilians, because as the Israeli media has uncovered, the Israeli military implemented the Hannibal Directive and brought to bear absolutely stunning amounts of munitions against the cars that were fleeing from the settlements and from the military bases into Gaza. But I'm willing to accept that some Palestinian militants killed some civilians, and I denounce that unequivocally. The fact of the matter is, though, that what they did on that day is a tiny fraction of what Israel can do and has done every day. So that's we should be concerned about reality, not about some, figment of imagination in the mind of a Hamas leader.
Dimitri, first of all, number one, I think this kind of denialism has been debunked many times over. I don't really want to go there. The famous footage of all those burned cars by the roadside was actually shot on October 8th, not October 7th. There's the denialist argument has been, I don't buy it.
I'm not denying.
Let me finish.
I acknowledge
Let me finish.
Some Israeli civilians. I acknowledge it and I denounce it.
Now, there's no doubt that the Hamas strategy was a colossal failure. But the Hamas strategy, which flowed from the entire, Islamist Muslim Brotherhood ideology that underlies that organization, the Hamas strategy was to use October 7th to ignite an all Middle Eastern, all Muslim jihad against Israel. And if that strategy had been successful, then yes, it would have, raised the question, raised the possibility of the violent, extermination of the Israeli nation. Now, I agree with you totally that the strategy was fatally flawed from the beginning. There isn't remotely the basis for an all Muslim jihad against Israel. And I agree that that Hamas was living in a world, a world of its own illusory, development. But the fact is that was their intention. Now, I certainly agree with you 100% that there is a vast power imbalance between Israel, backed by the U.S. with an unlimited supply of U.S. weapons, and a few thousand militias armed with militiamen are armed with automatic weapons in Gaza. A strip of territory, 25 miles long and up to 7.5 miles wide. That's the size of the borough of Queens here in New York. So I agree with you totally that there is a vast power imbalance, which just speaks to the utterly flawed. I mean, almost the word should be almost insane aspect of the Hamas strategy, which has brought nothing but ruin, unimaginable ruin to the people of Gaza. Now, you don't want to criticize Hamas. That is the fatal flaw of this movement, because the Palestinian people are subject to dual oppression,
Daniel,
by Islamists and Zionism.
Daniel, just interrupt real quick. It seems that you don't accept, or at the very least, that you don't want to deal with the fact that Israel has murdered hundreds of thousands of people, and that you are focusing on this idea of Hamas said they wanted to do this. Well, Donald Trump says he's the best president, or that he's been told that he was the best president since Abraham Lincoln. Do you believe him? Meaning, just because somebody says something doesn't mean they have the capability to do exactly what they said. And again, we're also ignoring the fact that this is a group that is resisting as opposed to the other group that is oppressing. Meaning people have the right under international law to resist. And I know you may say, well, they killed 1,200 people. Let's say they did. Let's say they did. He has already criticized them for doing so, saying, look, they shouldn't kill civilians. But many of these people that they took were soldiers. And the majority of the people who work in Israel are soldiers. So it's a prison break. And Israel turns around and murders hundreds of thousands, the overwhelming majority being women and children. And the question of whether or not this is a genocide is the thing that's of paramount. Regardless of what Hamas said they wanted to do, they obviously don't have the capability of doing it. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of them would be massacred.
Well,
I mean, I guess my thing is, do you just not accept that? Or you're looking at this as, well, these are equal things, despite the fact that Israel has murdered this many people?
They're equal and they're not equal. I mean, first of all,
whoa, what does that mean?
Well, let me explain, please. I mean, first of all, do I believe Hamas could have carried that out? No. Do I believe that Hamas believed it could carry it out? Yes. So yes. I think Hamas, the strategy was to ignite an all-Muslim jihad against Israel. That strategy failed abysmally, but that was their strategy. And I think it was a fatally flawed strategy, and which brought ruin to the people of Gaza. And the people of Gaza, where Hamas is vastly unpopular at this point, want a new leadership, and they are entitled to a new leadership. I mean, Japan thought it could defeat the U.S. by bombing Pearl Harbor. Okay? Japan's strategy was fatally flawed. I remember reading about a Japanese kid in the summer of 1945, watching wave after wave of American bombers pass overhead. He was in some small village on their way to Tokyo, wherever it was. And he said, what kind of leadership would pick a battle with a vast industrial power like this? The incompetence was staggering. And those those words, Jamal, apply just as much to Hamas. It's incompetence.
I would like to
think that everything you're saying is true.
We're running out of time, and I'd like to have an opportunity here. I do want to deal with the second question as well. Okay, so I don't think that I don't accept that the goal was to ignite an Islamic jihad against the Jewish people. Yes, did Hamas want other peoples of the region and governments to come to the aid of the Palestinian people and to participate in a military confrontation with Israel's evil, barbaric regime? Yes, it did. But are you telling me that ultimately, if they had the intention of trying to wipe out through some Islamic, pan-jihad against the Jewish people in Israel, that they would have been able to carry it out when Israel is the only state in the entire Middle East that has nukes? Do you have any doubt in your mind that if such a jihad erupted, Israel would have hesitated to nuke the countries that were attacking it? It would have done so without hesitation. And I think they're richly aware of that fact, Daniel, which may have something to do with the fact that they didn't want to participate. But mostly it's about the fact, again, the American government, I'm glad to know that you renounce it, has installed one brutal, corrupt, washed-in vassal after another in the Arab world in order to impose its will upon the peoples of this resource-rich region. That's why it failed. But if it had gained any traction amongst these governments, Israel would have nuked the whole lot of them, and you know it. So even there, your theory falls apart.
Dimitri, I already agreed with you. I already agreed with you.
A lot of talking. I want another thing. Okay,
I already agreed with you. Why are you arguing?
I'm going to read for you in the question of how many Israeli civilians were actually killed by Palestinian militants on October 7th from an ABC Australia news article published last year. This is not a pro-Palestine organization, as I'm sure you know. In July, it says, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz revealed commanders in the IDF gave the order to fire on troops who had been captured by Hamas, explicitly referencing the Hannibal Directive. One former Israeli officer, Air Force Colonel Nof Eretz, told the Haaretz podcast the directive was not specifically ordered, but was apparently applied in responding air crews. Panicked, operating without their normal command structure and unable to coordinate with the ground forces, they fired on vehicles returning to Gaza, knowing they were likely carrying hostages. Quote, this was a mass Hannibal. It was tons and tons of openings in the fence and thousands of people in every type of vehicle, some with hostages and some without, Colonel Haaretz said. Air Force pilots described to Yedioth Ahronot newspaper, an Israeli newspaper, the firing of, quote, tremendous amounts of ammunition October 7th at people attempting to cross the border. 28 fighter helicopters shot over the course of the day, all of the ammunition in their bellies in renewed runs to rearm. We are talking about hundreds of 30-millimeter cannon mortars and Hellfire missiles, reporter Yoav Zaytoun said. This is from the Israeli media. This is from sources inside the Israeli military. This is not denialism. We don't know how many civilians were killed by Israeli military forces, but based on what we do know, it was a lot more than one or two. And it may well have constituted the majority of the civilians who died on that day. That is
absurd. Al Jazeera did a half-an-hour documentary on October 7th in mid-2024, in which they examined various what might be called friendly fire incidents. And they found at most a dozen incidents, and most of those were highly questionable. What this is referring to by people, reports of Israeli helicopters firing machine guns at vehicles heading back into Gaza. Well, all that would suggest is that that the killing on the ground in Israel itself had already been completed. There's famous footage showing dozens of burnt out vehicles, but that which has made the rounds on the internet as supposed proof of the so-called Hannibal directive. But that footage has been shown to have been shot on October 8th, not October 7th. I don't think it's fruitful to get into a debate over denialism. Here, it's too far afield. It'll lead us into an evidentiary labyrinth.
Okay, so
but let me finish. But Dimitri, before you were arguing with me, but I agreed with you. I mean, I agreed that the hopes of a pan-Muslim jihad were delusional. I agree that Hamas did not have the capability, not remotely, to meet Israel on the battlefield on equal terms. And I agree with you that if somehow a pan-Islamic jihad had materialized, Israel would have responded with every ounce of firepower in its arsenal, and that includes the 50 nukes or so that it supposedly has. I agree that the U.S. has installed one barbaric regime after another in the Middle East, though I don't want to absolve the Middle Eastern nations of responsibility as well. But I don't know why you're trying to pick an argument with me, because I'm agreeing with you at every turn. I'm sorry.
It just seems like. Well, just to interrupt real quick. It just seems like if you agree with that, then you kind of agree that Hamas didn't have the capability of doing, meaning just because they said it, they didn't do it. Then the whole argument of genocide for Hamas falls apart.
But tomorrow, the Genocide Convention says intent. Doesn't say the actual ability. It says intent. If my intent is to wipe out every last member of X group, then according to the UN Convention, if I take any action on the basis of that intent, I am guilty of genocide, even before I've harmed a single hair on the single head of a single member of that group. The Genocide Convention is a meaningless, incoherent term, a neologism cooked up by a emotionally disturbed right-wing Zionist named Raphael Lemkin. And
but starvation
doesn't make any sense.
Just be clear, though, starvation is not an intent; it's an action.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, but the convention says intent.
I only have 12 minutes left, and I really do want to, because this was what precipitated this whole debate, were claims that Daniel made on your program about the popular will of the Palestinian people. I think it's very important that we address that in the little time remaining to us. Can we do that?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. And let's hit that under the context of the future of Hamas, of Gaza.
Right.
Let's go with that. And Dimitri,
I've had the opportunity to educate myself about some of Daniel's writings on the subject. So if I may, I'd like to take a few minutes and lay out my position. Is that okay?
Please. Yes.
Okay. So I just want to, again, be clear. I think Daniel and I are both, we've been very clear that we think that the Palestinian people should have a democracy, a robust democracy, and they should exercise democratic rights. So I'm curious, I frankly a little bit wary of the idea that Daniel is willing to take that principle to its logical conclusion when it comes to the Palestinian people, for reasons I'm going to lay out. But I think we both agree on the general principle that there should be democracy in occupied Palestine. And as I said, I wouldn't vote for a party that's explicitly religious or conservative in nature. I'm a leftist and I am an atheist. So that would be ruled out from the get-go with any party of that political orientation. Now, here in the West, it's very clear we do not brook any suggestion that foreign powers can dictate to us who will govern us. In the United States, in Canada, right across the West for the last decade, we've watched this pathetic hysteria about alleged Russian and Chinese interference in the politics of Western countries. So we would never countenance the idea that foreigners can say, hey, you know what, Joe Biden and Donald Trump and the establishments of the parties they represent, committed genocide in Gaza. They've committed countless other crimes. Therefore, you, the American people, you may not vote for Republicans. You can't vote for Democrats. These people can't run for political office. Americans would never tolerate that for 1 second. And if you believe in human equality, you would say the same thing about Palestinians. Palestinians can't be dictated to about who can run for political office in Palestine, who can govern them, whatever we may think about the choices that they make. Now, in an article in May of this year, this gets to the question of who would they choose if they were given the opportunity to choose freely. In an article in May of this year, Daniel cited the very poll that you and I talked about, Jamal, the last time I was on your program, by that Palestinian polling agency. If you want to get the exact name for him, it's in Daniel's article. And in the article, Daniel cites it for only one purpose. And he says it's a very credible and reputable polling agency. And the purpose for which he cites it is to show that a minority of people living in Gaza, 38% or 37%, now believe, it was a majority before, now believe that the October 7th attacks were the correct decision. And that something in the range of, I think, 46% disagree with that contention. Okay. But as we discussed, Jamar, on your program, there's a lot more information in that poll than just the attitude of people in Gaza to the decision to attack Israel on October 7th. And by the way, Daniel didn't mention not only that information, he didn't mention that the overall view in occupied Palestine, including the West Bank, about the correctness of the decision to attack on October 7th is 50% believe it was and 40% oppose. Because in the West Bank, a substantial majority think it was the correct decision. But that's not what I want to focus on. Daniel said it, when he spoke to you, that if there were an election held today in Gaza, Hamas would lose by a margin of 10-1. And his May 22nd article, he began it with these words: if Gaza by some miracle were to hold free elections tomorrow, there isn't the slightest doubt what the results would be. Hamas would be out in a flash. So what does the poll, which Daniel referenced in that very article by this very credible polling agency in Palestine, actually say? It says, first of all, that 87% of Palestinians reject the claim that Hamas committed the atrocities alleged against them on October 7th. Furthermore, that same poll asked Palestinians for whom they would vote if there were a presidential election, and they found that if Marwan Barghouti, who is languishing in a tortuous dungeon of Israel for over 20 years, if he were allowed to run, he would get 50% of the vote. The Hamas leader Khalid Mishal would get 35%, and Abbas would get a lowly 11%. But if they also asked what would happen if Barghouti is not available to run, in a two-way race, Mishal would crush Abbas, 68% to 25% for Abbas. Fourth, when asked which political party or movement they support, the largest percentage, 32%, said they prefer Hamas, followed by Fatah, 21%. 12% selected third parties, and 34% said they do not support any of them or do not know. And 77% said they oppose the disarming of Hamas, which means, based on these numbers, that there are a lot of people in occupied Palestine who would not vote for Hamas, either in presidential elections or legislative elections, but who demand that it be allowed to retain its weapons. That is the democratic will and preference of the Palestinian people. And whatever I think about them, I would stand for their decision because they have every right to determine their own destiny, just as we do. So my question to you, Daniel, I'd appreciate if you could address it in time remaining to us, is if there were an election and you're wrong and this poll is right and the Hamas were to win, would you support that decision? Would you say, I'm not in the sense that you'd support Hamas, but would you say, as I do, that Israel and foreign governments cannot dictate that choice and must respect the will of the Palestinian people?
Yes.
Well, I don't know that we're...
Is that the end of the discussion? Yes, the answer is yes. I don't think that would happen, but the answer is yes.
Well, okay. Well,
yes,
what do you say about the polling evidence that you yourself described as credible and reputable?
Dimitri, let me finish. If you have democracy and the results don't turn out the way you would like them to do, and that has been my personal experience for about 99% of my life, you have to respect the outcome. I quite agree. I don't think that would happen, but the name of the group, by the way, is the Palestine Center for Public Opinion. They're an extremely reputable group, and in a recent poll in early October of 301 Gazans, 71% said both sides had lost the war, and 64% cited, quote, widespread destruction and suffering with no political gains, unquote, as the reason. Now, I don't think that if 64% say the war got nowhere, I doubt very strongly that that 64% would vote for a continuation of the same old leadership which brought the war on.
Well, let me
just, Dimitri, but if they did, I would have to respect that vote, assuming all the democratic niceties were followed. But I don't think they would.
Sorry, who did that poll, Daniel?
Yeah, that poll was by the same group you cited before. That was the Palestine Center for Public Opinion.
Okay, so we both agree that that's a reputable firm. So yes. My response to you is that, and at the end of the day, this is really sort of beside the point, because the only way to find out is to let the Palestinian people have an election and to keep our damn noses out of it.
Could I say one thing?
But hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let me suggest to you why they might still vote for Hamas, because they might blame the corrupt, brutal, savage Arab autocrats for betraying them. They might say, yeah, it was a failure, but it wasn't because of Hamas that it's a failure. A lot of them would say it's because of those savage tyrants, those vassals of Washington. They might say, that we underestimated the brutality of Israel. We never imagined that it would go this far. They might say, despite my being unhappy with the outcome, there are reasons why I will nonetheless vote for Hamas. For example, because I am a devout Muslim and I appreciate their embrace of the values of Islam. Who knows? The question you just recited to us is not the question that matters. The question that matters is, if you were allowed to vote in a free and fair election, how would you vote? The most recent evidence available, which isn't that old, from May of this year, shows clearly that Hamas would thrash Fatah in both legislative and presidential elections. And the only case in which they would lose is if Marwan Barghouti were freed. And by the way, I would love to see Marwan Barghouti freed and to stand election in Palestine.
Okay. I'm not sure what we're arguing about. I mean, we both believe in democratic elections, and yes, it's possible that Hamas would win. I think it's extremely unlikely, and if there was an election, I would hope the choice would not be limited to Fatah or Hamas. I would hope that there would be a left-wing socialist alternative, because I believe that is the only way out of this conflict. But yeah, if there was a democratic election, I would earnestly hope that socialists would prevail. As to whether they would prevail or not, I don't know, but I would certainly hope they would. But we agree on the need. Hamas has not had said okay to an election since 2006. There were demonstrations in favor of elections, which Hamas sent its goons out to smash.
They won those elections. They won those elections. Why should
they won in 2006. There were subsequent protests in favor of new elections, which Hamas repressed.
When and where?
Oh, goodness.
When is the last time
they were in Gaza, I believe, in 2011.
Daniel, when is the last time there was an election in the West Bank?
There has not been an election, and when was the last? Israel has held 5 elections,
and it's
5 parliamentary elections
of the Palestinian
2022. Okay.
No, I'm talking about
now. Israel's held 5 elections since 2022. Now, I'm not trying to point to Israel as a paragon of democracy, but I'm showing that a party like Hamas, which has not agreed to elections for close to 20 years, is a dictatorship. One which weighs more and more heavily on the Palestinian people.
What I'm getting at is, when is the last time the Palestinian Authority had an election?
Oh, I'm not defending the Palestinian Authority, Jamal.
I know, but you're going after Hamas saying they haven't had an election, and I'm pointing out that there wasn't one in the West Bank. I haven't forgotten how long.
Look, the overarching reason for the lack of an election is because Israel and the United States don't want one. And they don't want one because the last time it happened, Hamas won. That's the reason there haven't been any elections in occupied Palestine.
If Hamas had wanted to have an election in Gaza alone, it could have done that. It didn't. For 20 years, there has not been an election. I mean, give me a break, Dimitri. Come on. You're facing a far right dictatorship. You should not be apologizing for.
Again, I'm not accepting your characterization of what Hamas wants, but I do know this much, that Hamas believes that occupied Palestine is an integrated whole, and they reject any notion that Gaza should be governed separately from the West Bank. So if you're right that they opposed an election, it's only because, in my opinion, the most likely explanation is it would have just legitimized this idea that Gaza and the West Bank are distinct and that they should have 2 separate governments, which
Dimitri,
at the end of the day, Daniel, what really matters here, and I've got to go, unfortunately, I have another interview in 2 minutes, is that the Palestinian people will be allowed to decide and that we respect their choice. And it sounds like we agree on that.
Dimitri, this is a far right dictatorship. Why are you making excuses for them?
I'm not making it. I'm telling you that
you are making excuses for them. You are making excuses for why they have not held an election in Gaza. You are making excuses. You are acting as a lawyer in Hamas's behalf. Why are you doing that?
I'm about to do another interview on RT, so I need to go. I'm sorry about that. But if you want to continue this discussion, by the way, happy to do so.
I'm delighted to also.
Dimitri, thank you for this. Daniel, thank you for this. I appreciate both of you for being able to come on the show and have this kind of conversation. Dimitri, I know you have to go, so I'm going to let you go. You be safe.
Take care.
Thank you for this, man. And Daniel, again, also, I want to thank you for joining and coming on and have this conversation. And just for the audience, just to give the everybody's bio, Dimitri Lascaris, lawyer, journalist, activist. He runs the show, Reason to Resist. He has a great show. Check him out. Daniel Lazare, independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution and American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War. You can check him out on Twitter at DHLazare. You can find his columns on permanentrevolution.org and DanielLazare.substack.com. Daniel, thank you for this, man.
Thank you.
You be safe. Have a good one.
Same to you.